Well, hello. Here I am again, John Barnwell, and hope you have your coffee already or your beverage of choice. Tea. I'm really happy to have here a friend of mine from Tea. I'm really happy to have here an echo. Friend of mine from Tea. I'm really happy to have here an echo. Friend of mine from. Okay, we got that. Yeah. Doing sound checks on multiple platforms sometimes causes problems. Anyways, we're here with my dear friend Zeeshan. And Zeeshan Haider Khan lives in Wales, in the southwestern part of the Isle of what is now Great Britain. And he's a wonderful herbalist, and he's into organic gardening, and he's a lifestyle counselor, and that's a whole dimension of my own personal journey that I don't get into so much because there's so many problematic issues going on within the political, social, economic spheres that I don't really get to talk much as I'd like about the things that actually really interest me and are really life promoting, one of which is holistic health, natural food. As many of you already know, I was the manager of the Mayflower Bookshop back in its heyday for the late 1970s into the early 80s, and we were the largest alternative metaphysical bookstore in the world, but we're also the largest holistic health bookstore in the world, and we had all kinds of interesting curios and incense and essential oils and all that. And so I thought it'd be great to get Zeeshan here because we have such great conversation. And it's always like talking to this light being. You know, you're so radiant with your close attempt to follow the laws of nature in the natural setting in the hills, the pastoral, beautiful trees, and you wildcraft your herbs, and so I thought it'd be really interesting to discuss that here today with you. And we didn't rehearse this, so it's going to be a lot of fun because we never know where it's going to end up. Zeesh, how you doing, buddy? You want to give a little introductory about yourself? I might help.
Okay, so hi everyone. Hi John, thanks for having me here. And so a little bit about Zeesh. So, father last 18, 19, 20 years, 4 children, all home birthed, 3 of them unassisted, and all different stories. John shares about the Mayflower bookstore here in Britain. We have Glastonbury, so I suppose that's kind of where my journey started. Having before I had children, had cats and dogs, and as you all know, you want to do the best for them. And I've always just wanted to do the best for my children and for my dogs and my cats, and always open to learning new things. And I was very lucky, fortunate to have a very good vet, a time served, respected vet in Glastonbury called Mr. Trevor Adams. He was well respected in Glastonbury. Very, what I would say was almost like the heart of Glastonbury. You know, he wasn't with crystals and what many people would imagine. He was very much a serving man. I'd often see him walking through town with like an old lady's basket going to collect his mother's food, and very, very humble. And I remember going to see him with my dog and with my cats, and often I'd see German shepherds running out of his veterinary clinic with smiles on their faces. And I was like, you know, it was unusual because I knew that German shepherds' back legs would go. So he was not only a conventional time served vet, but he was also a homeopath, and he was also an acupuncturist. I'd see German shepherds coming out with smiles on their faces, and I had a few adversities with a cat, And through this challenge and adversity, where a normal in the frame vet may have put a cat down, Trevor was very much into seeing what else could be done. And through working with him and through working with my dogs and just wanting the best, as I said, from a vet, I started to learn about homeopathy. I started to learn about lavender and natural medicines. And I thought to myself, my God, this stuff's amazing. If it could work for them, could it work for me and Kate? And then I suppose that's where the journey started. And being in Glastonbury, we had similar stores to the Mayflower, so we'd have access to things like essential oils, organic food, farmers markets, and even I was fortunate to work in a bookstore that sold many of the books of the raw food, living foods movement. And I think in around 2001, a gentleman from San Diego came over, Mr. David Avocado Wolf, and I enjoyed my first kombucha, being a father, and from that moment on, having an adversity in the family, my journey into living food, life food, and food, the subtle energy of mood, began. So thank you. There's a little, yeah, and I'm a dad.
That's great. Yeah, Glastonbury's been quite the center for a long time for people that are on a kind of a spiritual quest. There's all the stories regarding what happened there as far as the discovery of the Glastonbury zodiac that is a pre-Christian zodiacal mount that surrounds Glastonbury Tor. And it was discovered, I used to have the original book, and it gets into explaining how it was discovered. And it was not really easy discovering it until they had aerial photographs, because there's little cottages on top of parts of it. And, it's not totally obvious that it exists there as the earthworks. But it showed that in the west of Britain, specifically Ireland, places of that ilk, that they had a very much a living relationship to nature. And Rudolf Steiner does describe about the ancient Arthurian mysteries in Cornwall, and about how they could observe clairvoyantly with their etheric clairvoyance that they still maintained in the pre-Christian era. And they could observe the workings of the forces of light from the sun into the waves crashing on the shore, and the elemental beings just like swimming in joy and interacting between the spirits of air and water. And that there's this whole living experience, and that the cosmic aspect of the Christ as the overall being of nature, it was something that's so strong in that area of the world. Whereas if you travel east, you have the more inward mystical aspect of the Grail mysteries, and Rudolf Steiner describes how those streams met with the southern stream that's kind of like the Egyptian stream, and the northern stream, which is the Wotan mysteries of the north, and how all four of them converged in France at Chartres Cathedral. And the cathedrals were really such important bases of learning and healing and prayer and taking the sacred into your life. And so consequently, in fact, even it's known now that the series of cathedrals that are in France that are dedicated to the Virgin Mary, that if you look at them on a star map, it creates the constellation of the Great Bear. Their actual geographical layout. There's a cathedral that corresponds to every star in the constellation of the Great Bear. So there's this cosmic mystery revealed there that's a hint at the type of cosmic wisdom that was being carried by the Knights Templar, who were the ones who carried forward that architectural impulse. But we're not going to explore that aspect. We're going to get more into the aspect of the gardening and healing and herbalism and all of that. And I picked Zeeshan. I know many people. I was involved in starting a biodynamic farm based on the principles of Rudolf Steiner back in the late 60s, early 1970s. So I've encountered a great many people that are involved in that movement. But from what I see from Z, she's so it's so refreshing that he's so sincere and clear, and he has a certain joy and radiance about what he's doing. So that the proof is in the pudding. And I think that I'm honored to know you, that you're a person. There's hope for the future because there's people like you that are out there that are trying to meet nature on her own terms rather than trying to torture nature into some kind of commerce box. Just with the commercialization of food is one of the great weakenings of modern culture. And so this people like yourself that are working towards redeeming all of that through natural food and herbology and just lifestyle changes, being more conscious about your choices.
Yes.
That's a lot. Yeah. I tend to ramble at times, and that's okay.
No, it's beautiful. It was beautiful. I'm still in the Great Bear, I think, part of me, which is really important because I've always, for me, again, I mentioned the vet. A little bit of an echo, John. Can you hear the echo? Is that okay?
Well, it has to do with your volume level. If you drop your volume just a touch, it'll get rid of it.
Okay. Is that better?
That's better.
Okay. Yeah. So the journey, the very destination started with, well, I suppose it started in 1994, going over to Glastonbury, hanging out with these hippie women, introducing me to miso, going to the Glastonbury and just learning. And while I was living around that area, I was fortunate to meet a lady selling organic food. And what struck me was these oranges, these biodynamic oranges. I didn't know what biodynamic was. I just seen these oranges, and it was the attention to the details, the way they were wrapped. They were blood oranges. They were from Sicily. There was writing on there, and the whole orange was like telling a story. It was wonderful. At the time, one of my medicines was cannabis, and I'd often grow my own cannabis, and I'd use that same paper to wrap my cannabis in. And so I had this almost like a love affair with biodynamic oranges and cannabis when I was a young teenager. Well, from there, then started to ask myself, what's biodynamic? Started to look into, because John's right, it's a lifestyle. I was looking at my dogs, I was looking at my cats, I was exploring homeopathy, seeing great results there. Slowly started to change my diet, learning about. I remember reading a Nexus magazine, so reading about things like angels not playing the harp and how you had to be. It was important to maybe not drink water from plastic bottles because it was messing up the estrogens. Living on a hill in Bath, around Bath, with while people were protesting against roads and stuff, I met one of Dion Fortune's, I think it was Dion Fortune's nephew, Nick, and he started to take me over to Glastonbury, and I started to learn about essential oils. And through all of that, I started to see that something was working. I'd start to meet healers and learn from them about the brain and kinesiology. Started to learn about MSM. A gentleman who was he was from gypsy origins. He was like Zeeshan, learn about gypsy music, and have some, and he was into Rudolf Steiner actually, and he gave me a sourdough that was from the Second World War. He had a cellar of kombucha, and so we're on this journey. Me and Kate would live in, the mother of my 4 children. We explored different places of living, and all the while through all of this, learning about organic, starting to learn about permaculture, and I suppose when we talk about the stars and the planets and things like that, I can't help but think about my early fortunate years with my grandmother, who was, and there isn't a day that goes by where I don't think about my grandmother. She passed away in 1986, and she was of Afghan origins. Now, it wasn't until about 2006, 2007, I was investigating, I suppose, spiritual aspects, and for me, around 2002, found the Sun Foods, the Life Food movement, and I found the works of a Dr. Gabriel Cousins, who has a place called the Tree of Life Rejuvenation Center in California. And he first introduced me to the idea of living foods. And so, but he also, it wasn't just the living foods, it was the aspect of spiritual nutrition. We all know you are what you eat, that you are what they eat, and you are what you think, and you are what you drink, you are what they drink and eat. And so my grandmother, she didn't actually speak any English, and as I was investigating the spiritual aspects, at some point wondering, was I Muslim, was I of that origin, I ended up meeting a 4th generation Welsh herbalist who was a Hare Krishna, who was very much inspired by Dr. Christopher's works and Richard Schultz's works in California and Dr. Bernard Jensen. And he led me, he said, Zeeshan, you have to go and meet this Hakim. He's of your culture. He's a Khan as well. You have to go and meet him. So I ended up going to meet him, and from investing a weekend with him, he was like, Zeeshan, you are. This is more than just a course for you. This is a tradition. You must. We've been watching you, and you must. You must pursue this investigation into herbal medicine. But through him, he was like, Zeeshan, you're very resourceful. We want you to help yourself to our herbal dispensary. Well, there's an old book by Arthur Wally translated about King Monkey, and Zeesh has got that kind of King Monkey aspect. Where in the book, the Journey to the West, there's a point where the monkey gets drunk on the peaches in the peach garden. So if a Hakim or somebody says to me, you're very resourceful, help yourself to my dispensary, I'm going to do just that. And it was very, very exciting. But this brings me back to my grandmother, because my grandmother, 1986, she named me her Zeeshan. She didn't speak any English. She was from the northwest frontier of Afghanistan, originally from Kabul. And going to see her was like a breath of fresh air. And I didn't know at the time that she was passing down things. And I suppose it's because she didn't speak that transmission was deep. And she'd always be chewing and smiling and doing things with her hands here in Britain. She died in 1986. And I remember burying her in the foothills of northwest frontier Afghanistan during the war between the Russians and the Afghans. And there's a part of me that's still there up on that mountain, like a child of the sun. And so while I'm with that Hakim, I start to learn that, and he says to me, he says, Zeeshan, help yourself to my dispensary. Now, I hadn't had milk, like proper milk, since 1986 when they gave it to me in the mountain and it was warmed. And I never drank it again after that. I was like, oh, I'll never ask for milk again. But while I was there, I had a catapult in one hand and a bag of sugarcane in the other hand. And every day, that was my nutrition. It was the sun. It was on the rooftops with the eagles, with the children of Alexander, catapult in one hand, sugarcane in the other. I was age 10, and I was with my Afghan uncles, Mujahideen, that were very warm and loving and very kind. And I felt very much at home. In fact, at that moment, I felt like a child of the sun. There's paintings by, I think, around the time probably with the whole Rudolf Steiner movement happening. There was definitely, I know from my own research into food, there was definitely a movement happening where the youth were leaving home, were exploring the nature. And as I learn more about Rudolf Steiner and the agricultural lectures and stuff, I'm like, wow, that's what was going on. The youth were leaving. They were going out and exploring nature and celebrating nature. It's really, really quite wonderful. If you get a chance to look at his paintings of Fidus, they're really, really good. But anyway, I'm in the Hakim's herbal center. He brought Dr. Bernard Jensen, who's the grandfather of herbal medicine in America. Many of you may know of his work. And he was the grandfather of holistic health. And he taught my Hakim friend iridology. Well, because he said to me, help yourself to my herbal dispensary, I did just that. And he had this pitch rejuvenating mineral, herb elixir liquid, based on the wisdom of, I suppose it's like Galen and Hippocrates. We have Avicenna, and it was that canon of medicine. I suppose when John often talks about the Alexandrian library, I suppose it's from those days when there was that merging of like the tales of remarkable men and great wisdom from north, east, south, and west. And we had this wonderful liquid. He had it. I hadn't had dairy milk since, I said, like 1986. I'd been quite a bit of a sort of puritanical living foods, raw foods, vegan up until that point, really. And I got that milk. I got that elixir and my brain was just switched on. And I just literally, throughout that day, just drank the whole raw milk and this panacea, I'm going to call it. It was this wonderful, prayed herbal medicine with great wisdom in there, with honey and balm of Gilead and saffron. And well, anyway, that evening, went to sleep. I read a bit of scripture from a holy book because I was investigating, is this for me? And that evening I went to sleep and I awoke with at 3 a.m. in the morning with this little lady, like my grandmother, with long silver hair, wonderful skin, giving me this little vassal. And I awoke going, Alam, 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 Alam. And it just stayed. It was like this note, like this notation, like Alam. And I awoke, and as I was learning from the Hakims that we have very similar to the Rudolf Steiner wheel, which I've seen recently with the sanguine and the different like winter, spring, summer, autumn, summer, autumn, that whole cycle, that we have that in the day. It's very similar to the Western tradition and the Eastern tradition and the Chinese and the Tibetan and all these different medicines. And through that day, then, as I'm walking, I wake up at 3 a.m. and I walk through Leicester. I'm in Leicestershire. It's very urban, very built up, and I'm walking, and I walk over this little bridge, and I feel the thermals, and I go past the mosque because I'm in the eastern area of Leicestershire. I pass a mosque, pass the smell of certain herbs, get to a little river, wash in the water. It looks like it's a wishing well. I see some coins. I put them back into the water, and I specifically seen what looked like a moon, like a silver coin, a French franc, and it had this like goddess of liberty and the Liberty Lady. And I thought, it reminded me of the moon, so I picked it up and I carried it, and I went and washed, and I found rosemary, lavender, did my ablutions, came back down the hill. The sun came up, seen this little lady on the horizon, did a little sun salutation, and came down past that smell of herbs again. Here in Britain, we're not allowed to grow cannabis, so somebody was growing it lawfully in their loft. And I passed the wind, past the mosque, and in that moment, the wind, and I often talk to John about this, the wind reminded me of my nan. The wind asked me, and since we've been here, it's gone quite still, which is quite beautiful. The wind said to me, like, come back to the bridge. So I came back to the bridge. It was like that intuition. That's what I've been learning from the Rudolf Steiner. It's that intuition. It was like something said, come back to the bridge. Came back to the bridge, looked over, and it was like I got washed in the wind, like an air bathe, an air bath. And then God's spirit, whatever, said to me, go to the bridge. And I went to the bridge, and and I'm in an urban setting, and this little wally wagtail went through with a kingfisher, and you don't see them that much. And I'm in a built-up city, and I felt it was quite an auspicious, power animal, magic moment. And I literally took that little French franc, and I flipped it, and I made a wish for all children on the earth. I've got 2 children that have had a incurable diagnosis, so we've had bits of adversity there, but we're not victims. My granddad was called Victor, so we're on the Victor here. And I made a prayer, and I went back then, met the Hakims that morning, and I was basically being initiated into their tradition. But anyway, long and the short, it didn't really work out. But what I learned from them was, because I wanted to go straight to what I wanted to learn, I didn't want to go for all the other stuff. I just wanted to go straight to the gems and the wisdom, like the rocks and the gems. And but what was good was I found out that what my grandmother had been feeding me, she named me. She adorned me every time I'd see her, because I was the only Muslim in a Christian school. She'd adorn me. I felt like she was always cleansing me of the evil eye. She didn't speak any English. She'd always be doing things with herbs, and but what I noticed was she'd always give me this herbal panacea. It was roses harvested under the full moon, back to the bear, under the full moon, and they were harvested under the full moon, put into honey, and then they were left to experience the cooling properties of the honey. Now, what I'm learning is my nana, because one of my things from learning from John and everything, I've been learning that one of my things is self-regulating. The works of Wim Hof, I really thrive in that hot, cold. And what my nana was essentially doing was cooling me down. Now, over the last 20 odd years on that journey of unraveling, I think we're like reverse engineering, remembering, not fading away. And I feel I've always had roses in my life. Me and Kate, we've been together since 1994. We've always had roses. Now all my children have roses. And it was only about 8 years ago, from meeting that Hakim, did I find out that what my nana was doing was essentially what Rudolf Steiner would call biodynamics. And we're now positioned again in a place where we can focus on the roses. And now the missing element is the bees. So back to you, John. Thank you.
Yes.
I'm on 20%. So, but it's lovely to be here. And yeah, anyway, thank you.
Yes, the wisdom of the bees. How do they know? You know, it's such a wonderful thing. One of the earliest lecture cycles of Rudolf Steiner that I encountered was his 9 lectures on bees, which is just absolutely remarkable. And you can find it for free on the Rudolf Steiner archive.org, or you can order a copy of the book from Rudolf Steiner Press or Steiner Books. And in any event, yes, it's interesting because you're talking about Ibn Sina, or what he was called in the Middle Ages, Avicenna, and he's really considered one of the most important physicians, astronomers, and writers of what was called the Islamic Golden Age. But he's the father of, really one of the fathers of modern medicine. And it's interesting because he took Aristotelian philosophy and he adapted it as his method in evaluating health conditions and all of that. And there's around 450 or so works that he's said to have written, you know, and still there's some 240 of them that are floating around, and 40 of them happen to be on medicine. And so he's a very significant guy, and we're talking about in the medieval period. So we're talking about he was from like early medieval, like from 980 to 1037 is when he lived, and he was Persian. But that being said, so in being Persian, he also had that influx of the Zoroastrian, which is a really heavy-duty gardening mystery, and it was Zarathustra, the primeval Zarathustra, who was way back before ancient Egypt, even, who was the one who crossbred the various fruit trees from the rose plant, and the various grains are from the lily plant. So you have your your five-fold image in the rose, and then the six-fold image in the lily, so that the lily is like the astral, and the rose is the etheric, the five-fold nature of that. I just give that to you as images. But see, being able to come to these things on a universally human level, I think is what's so fascinating about your journey, is because you've been so eclectic. And yeah, we used to deal directly with Bernard Jensen, get his books. My business partner in the music business for a great many years was a direct student of Dr. Christopher and learned iridology from him. And he was also a direct student of Dr. Christopher, and that's where he learned his herbalism. My old partner, Bobby Hankins, who was the manager of Ted Nugent at one time. But in any event, we started that label out of Virgin Records, London, way back in the day. But to get back into the herbalism, yeah, I've always had a fascinating interest in these things ever since my mother started reading books on vitamins, and she was always trying to give me these vitamins and all that. And I kept looking further and further and thought, well, it seems to be much better to get it from food, doesn't it? And I got into developing my relationship. I studied and ended up teaching yoga and studied numerous martial arts like Aikido, Tai Chi Chuan, karate, starting out originally with savants. But I was very much interested in physical culture and as being that support system for developing spiritual culture. Because really one of the first things I encountered personally was the works of Rudolf Steiner and Ouspensky. But I gravitated more to Steiner. I found Ouspensky to be more of kind of an intellectual path. He's the Gurdjieffian fourth way stuff and all that. Although I continue to stay on top of that and many other schools of thought. But in my own personal journey, the longest success I had was dealing in natural health through seaweed-based supplements, and that Rudolf Steiner described that the best herbs to use were ones that grew in a rugged, mountainous regions where the plants really had to fight to receive their nutrition from that rocky soil. And so they were much more vital. And consequently, it gave a greater resistance. See, the thing to understand is that you have what's called an etheric body, which is your life body of formative forces that you share with plants. And then your body of movement is the astral body, and you share that with the animals. And then you're a human, so you have an ego or an I am principle that you've received through Christ, the Logos. But this etheric is the life body, and that's what when you get tired and you have to sleep, that's because you need to regenerate your etheric body. Now, you could strengthen your etheric body by taking living foods, and it's the resistance of the etheric nature of the plant against your etheric nature that your etheric body has to overcome in order to take in the nutrition and make it a part of you. So it's not that making it easy is better. It's because it's difficult that it strengthens you. And so what you're doing with your wild crafting of herbs and flowers and essences and all of that is a direct expression of the natural wisdom behind that. And so it's really interesting that we've really never had this conversation as much as we'd like to, because you're way over there and I'm way over here, and I'm kind of new to this format of communication. So there's so many conversations we hadn't gotten around to yet. But then tying in Glastonbury, it reminds me of Wesley Tudor Pole, who was really a remarkable individual who, with consulting with Winston Churchill, created the minute of silence in World War II, where you go on the radio and it would be that moment of silence, and everybody in the country would stop talking and just hold the silent moment is like a silent prayer. And oh well, we won the war, so I guess it worked. But he was the guy who established the Chalice Well Foundation, which was for the preservation of Glastonbury Tor and the Chalice Well that's at Glastonbury. And so it's to him that we owe the preservation of Glastonbury as it's now known.
Ah, wonderful, wonderful. Yes,
yeah,
because
a character.
What's his name again? Walter.
Wesley.
Oh, Wesley.
Tudor Pole. So he's related to the De Pole family and the Tudors. So that he would actually, if he were alive today, have a greater claim to the crown of England than the present residents of the castle living here at this time. But anyways, it's pretty funny. But he was interesting.
Yes.
He was friends with Baha'u'llah of in that whole movement. It was kind of a universally human religious movement, the Baha'i world faith, and he did a lot with the British intelligence in trying to help Baha'u'llah and the Bab and all these guys that were working within that and were being persecuted in the region by the Muslims and stuff like that. So it's like there's a lot of history in there, but he's an interesting character to look up, and he has some interesting personal tales. One time he was riding on a bus and this stranger showed up and started telling him stuff, and he realized he was being initiated. And then he noticed the train was going over bumps, and this person was kind of just like there floating. And that even though Wesley Tudor Pole is going up and down, the guy sitting in front of him is just sitting there and he's not bouncing. So that the guy had actually was appearance of a phantom physical body, what it was, and he realized that he was speaking. And he thought about it, his wardrobe and all that, and he was speaking to a leader of the Rosicrucians. And so it's a fascinating story, quite apocryphal. But he took it to his grave. That was one of the like someone is saying here, pure intention. Yes, he was so full of pure intention that he was able to accomplish a great many things. And I see great things for you because I think your intentions are pure.
Oh, thank you. Well, Wesley reminds me a little bit of. Thank you, John. Thank you, and thank you. I really appreciate that. We can just do the best we can, can't we? And Wesley reminds me of Trevor Adams, to be fair, because many people may have this view of what they think Glastonbury is. I often can't help but think about how if Jesus was back, he might ransack the temples, and for me, it's going to the Abbey kitchen, the orchards. It's the surroundings. It's not that glamour. It's not the I have nothing against crystal stores and all that. I think all that's wonderful, but it really is. It's like the otters, the all around there. It's wonderful, and I met some of the Sufi people there and I've learned good things. And we were 23 minutes away, and then about 7 years ago, I got to a point where, because we're always, I heard a wise man say, if you want things to change, but you don't change, then expecting change is insanity. So while living around there, originally I'm from Wales, but while living around there, I was about 23 minutes away from Glastonbury, so I'd often go there on Tuesday. But I remember clearly having a 9-week journey where I was really wanting change, and I had 3 children at the time, and just started to discover. Well, actually, it was 9 weeks of selling cheesecake, a raw food, live food, living food cheesecake, and through those 9 weeks, it was an exploration. I suppose it was like a form of performance art. And the first human that came was a wonderful lady with a Greek Orthodox Christian, and he gave me these rose sachets. He says, burn them wherever you go on this journey. Start to burn them, and they'll start to clear the channels, as it were. like the astrals and the glamour and all that kind of stuff. So I started to burn these little rose pouches that were from Christian monks that had hand rolled them with frankincense and rose and jasmine and things like that from Mount Athos, which was really, really quite good. And then there was this lady came over, and I can only describe her as like, because as a kid I was into the fields of Nephilim and the New Model Army from my little Gothic era, and between hip hop and New Model Army, and this woman came over and she had this hat on, like out of the holy mountain, like a Jodorowsky, and she had these wonderful silver earrings on, and she smelt very good. God gave us a nose, the gift of smell, and I use it, and it's always served me quite well. And she smelt really good, and she said, "You are the last of the Armenians. You came down on these lenticular clouds." And I was like, wow, because I was at the time I was doing a degree in fine art, and I was like, wow, that's amazing. I did this little one piece of art. It never really went too far. I pinned it in one go, and I knew it was done. And it was these like chariots of these like Phoenicians or something, and I'd put this like Celtic, like I'd been cut. It was like cut ups, like the William Burroughs and Brian Gyson cut ups. I was exploring cut ups, and I did this chariot, and it was like coming out of these clouds, and I thought, oh my god! And it had like this text in the background, which I ended up meeting someone in in the Netherlands. He had to leave America because he got arrested trying to grow cannabis there. Moved into Holland and became a great successful organic seed producer. And he had these rocks because he's got an amazing rock gem crystal collection. And he was like, Zeesh, check these out. And because he knew I was Afghan, he'd given me some of this Afghan weed. I had one little bit of it. And but while I was there, I ended up getting to look at these wonderful, beautiful rocks that were from the Navajo. And they had these similar texts that were in these clouds. Well, this lady, she says, "You're the last of the Armenians." I thought, I've got to give you this art piece. I gave her the art piece, went through the 9 weeks selling and serving cake. It was raw nut cheesecake, no sugar, no dairy. So it meant that someone that, not because I have anything against dairy, I very much like pasture raised dairy, but it was a raw food, living food, nut cheesecake. I was able to offer it to anybody. I'd have like Celts coming up, and you could see they were probably on medication and felt like they couldn't possibly eat it, and I'd let them know that they could eat this cake. It was healthy. It had mesquite in there, which has actually unfortunately been banned in this country because of the Novel Foods Act that was brought out for Monsanto GMO. And it was really a form of service, like giving this cake. And that 9 weeks was a real exploration. In the end, well, on the last day of that 9 weeks, I went into town with this cake, and I'd met some interesting Sufis and interesting human beings, and we were really starting to shake the kind of like the what Glastonbury had become. We were kind of really pushing it and giving it a bit of a shake. I was with these youth and meeting these Sufi and everything. And on the 9th week, this gentleman turns up, an African kind of gentleman. He looked like something almost very Egyptian, and he had his child with him, a young child, maybe about 1.5. And it was like Jodorowsky Mobius character, Azrak, had this like, it had this jumpsuit on. It was like this little space being on her father's shoulders, and he was with his wife Esther, and they were into music, and they said, "You look like a man that embraces joy." And I said, "Well, you know, we're all human, and we do the best that we can. I do the best that I can." He said, "I'd really like to give you something." And on that day, because I'd have people that would come to the store, and sometimes I'd see them, and I had 16 pieces of cake, and I said, "Kate, do I have permission if I see somebody?" Kate's the mother of my 4 children who was making the cake. I said, "If I see somebody," and this is the cake that we'd make for our children, it was made with love. It wasn't, you know, that was the first premise, was the fact that it was something for the family, and we knew that we could make something happen from this. And I said, "Do I have permission to give this cake to people if I see someone who looks like their adrenals are burnt out, or they're looking tired, or I really feel like I want to give them a slice of cake? Can we do that? Because that was our livelihood." She said, "Yes, I'll give you permission to give a slice of cake." Well, this man comes over with his wife and his daughter. They've just been to the organic store. He mentions about joy, and he ends up giving me Armenian, an Armenian author, Torkom Saradarian. And from that moment on, long of the short, the sheriff comes over. I was going like, 6 on his serving men, they taught us all they knew. Their names are, we have a chocolate cake and a lemon cake too. I'd kind of changed it into my own, sort of the what, the when, and the why, and the how, and the who. And at that point, the sheriff comes up going, the sheriff of Glastonbury, North Somerset, John. It really has been, taken over by the sheriff. We must remember that the abbeys were destroyed, and that whole thing has kind of happened, like John's saying about how Wesley is the true patron and founder of the, real king, the king of each little village and area would have had their own tribal, their own kings and princesses and warrior priestesses and things like that, I imagine. And so this man gave the sheriff comes over and says, "We've had a complaint about your cake." And I was like, because it's getting to the point where I remember as a child, you'd go to market and there'd be hustle and bustle, and the man selling sauces and many different types of fish man, and the man selling his pheasants and his rabbits, and the Spanish family selling their vegetables, and real love affair of food, and and loudness, get your veggies, roll up, real connection to the food, being able to pick up a cauliflower and smell it, in these days, we're wondering if we're even going to be able to do that soon. But so somebody had complained, and the sheriff turns up. He's like, "We've had a complaint," and I said, "Well, he's like, who made the cake?" And in the end, they're like, "If you don't tell us, you won't be able to come here again, and you've got to go." And it was quite something. It was like this whole war about the cake, and but fortunately, the Hare Krishnas were over there. I said, "Look, just take my cake." So I gave them my cake. That ended up at an ashram, the Shekinah ashram. And the sheriff, then I ended up going, he said, "Oh, tell us who made the cake." And I said, it was like the useful idiot. He's like the change agents. And I was like, "Look, God made the cake." And I end up like going again, cake up at an ashram. But my point being, from that 9 weeks on, the Armenian at the beginning, the Armenian at the end, it then sent me down to Christchurch, where I met an amazing herbalist called Alan Hopkin. Now, in that year where I was really wanting change, had to leave England then to go home to Somerset. But in that cycle of that year, I met two South Africans, a South African herbalist called Alan Hopkin, which somehow dovetails into the Rudolf Steiner teachings, because he was into the three women, Roerick, Alice Bailey, and Helena Blavatsky. And I ended up meeting him. This lady's like, "You've got to go and meet him." So I ended up meeting him, and he was all about the ginkgo, and wonderful herbalist. Started helping move my children, and I started to really build a friendship with him. He wrote a really good book called Esoteric Healing, but his formulas were very, very good. And he started to introduce me to the works of Torquem Saradarian and what is meditation and this, that, and the other. And that was that gift from Esther. And I actually gave Esther and the mother and the child and the father the slice of cake. And then from that moment on, then and I'd met a chiropractor who was a South African. And then I came 7 years ago. And while I came here on a rainy day on a mountain, where in Ham Hill, Somerset, South Somerset, we were going to live on Dartmoor. We were like, "No, we need to go to Wales. We need more space, more air. We need water." And I found an apprenticeship down here in Wales. We returned home through mid Wales, and we came back, and we've been here 7 years. And when I came here, I was thinking ginkgo, and Alan, he's all about the Godshire herb. And I came here thinking ginkgo, because while I was having esoteric healing, they were teaching me about the astrals and the glamours, and just really helping me with that footing of being that change, wanting to be the strongest version of myself, being a better dad, and also always wanting to have that to put myself in a box, open to learn, investigating raw foods, veganism, living foods, life foods, naturopathy, nourishing traditions, and keeping open all the time, knowing that a wise man said, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those that cannot read and write, but will be those that cannot unlearn, relearn, and learn again. So then being here with that ginkgo, and that's, I heard a wise man, I think it was Earl Nightingale, saying the problem today with man is weakness of will and poverty of imagination. And I remember coming here very clearly in my mind's eye, thinking ginkgo, like with the blessing of Alan, and on like this flying carpet, magic carpet, with my family of 3. We're now a family of four, 5. We're now a family of 6 and 4 dogs, and we came here, and you couldn't have planned this. And John mentioned like, the Zarathustrian, so there's definitely a connection to dreams, and that the connection to where do we go when we sleep and what's happening, and these connections, that awe and inspiration. And long of the short, I got down into a 16th century walled garden, and what was there but a 150-year-old ginkgo tree? I went up the mountain, came down the mountain, like being in North Carolina, we'll be going up the mountain when she, that's that kind of song. And yeah, and I really feel that it's kind and gentle steps, adding those things in, and just knowing that there's more out there, be it the water, which has always been really important. You can go to www.findaspring.com and go and source and find local spring water. Because me and Kate have been saying,
You're starting to freeze up a little bit. And yeah, you're definitely following your bliss, as they say. And your stream has cut off for a second. Maybe your satellite feed moved or something like that. If you get disconnected, you can just try and log in again from the link I gave you. Yeah, getting into the Armenian. I'm quite familiar with Turkum Saradarian, and I have quite a few Armenian friends. In fact, a friend of mine from Toronto is a direct descendant of the brother of the last king of Armenia, and yeah, you fell off the feed there. Maybe you can log back in. So consequently, you can see somebody in Zeesh who's been avidly and enthusiastically and with the right intentions attempting to follow his path and leading it towards lifestyle choices that have really been a positive input. And so consequently, he's receiving the rewards from all the effort that he's put into it. And if you excuse me for a second, I'm going to make sure he knows he can just log back in if he can get a signal. Let's see here now. Log back in. Yeah. And so consequently, the whole idea of Glastonbury, that's an interesting story. He hadn't gotten around to telling me that part of his biography yet. But the idea of what was going on, and this is back in the coming out of the earlier periods and into the middle period of the 20th century, and he made reference to becoming friends with a direct student of Dion Fortune. Dion Fortune is a very interesting woman. She was actively involved in the Chalice Well Foundation and all of that. And she was actually a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn with William Butler Yeats and Arthur Edward Waite and all these interesting characters dealing with the idea of tarot and Kabbalah and all of that. Of course, the arch fiend Aleister Crowley came out of that same milieu too, but he attempted to pervert and commandeer those teachings and take him in another direction. But ultimately, in understanding the idea of that the early herbalists like Avicenna were learned in astronomy, and they were harvesting and planting according to cycles of the moon and all of that, so much of which is part and parcel of what you would learn in biodynamic gardening. And you can see that the structure of the plants, you can tell what planetary cycles a plant relates to by the mathematical ratio of the distribution of the branches and the leaves and the structure of the plant itself. That it's actually an image, like just the way you could see that Rose is Venus' sun, and that there's a pentagram shape that ties into the cycle of the orbit of Venus, so that these are actual geometrical realities that can be computed and understood, and a lot of this, of which I cover within my books, might as well talk about them now since Zeeshan isn't here with us. My first book is The Arcana of the Grail Angel, The Spiritual Science of the Holy Blood and of the Holy Grail. It's a study developed out of the work of Rudolf Steiner of the underground streams of esoteric Christianity, which flowed from the Brotherhood of the Holy Grail to the Order of the Knights Templar and the true Rosicrucian Order. That's some 640 pages compendium. And the sequel, a meditative tool, really, The Arcana of Light on the Path. And in both of these texts, I have just literally tons of diagrams explaining how to work with all the various cosmological cycles and historical cycles, and how it's all woven together in cosmic Christianity of the Grail. And looks like we might not be getting Zeeshan back, and that's okay, because we can always do another one. And but it's sometimes nice to be a little bit brief, which is not my strong suit. I tend to ramble on a little bit. But yes, cosmology gets larger today. Well, if your heart gets larger, then your cosmology gets larger. And the way to understand the heart is through studying the cosmos. The way to understand the cosmos is to look deep into your heart. So in any event, if you are interested in acquiring my books, you can get them on eBay, and that's The Arcana of the Grail Angel or The Arcana of Light on the Path. And the information is included in the text below the YouTube video or above the Facebook live stream. And also there's information to contact Zeeshan if you're interested in getting more information about the different herbal products that he creates. And he has them delivered to people far away as the United States. He just puts a lot of love and the proper form of attention into what he does. And so he's definitely worth finding more about. And I'm sure I'll have him on again soon. And I want to thank you all for coming to have a cup of coffee with me and with Zeeshan Haider Khan, my friend from Wales. You have a good day.